I've got some good news and some bad news for you today, Taplines listener. The bad news is that this is the last episode of Taplines. That's right. After 60, count them, 60 episodes of award-winning modern beer history, this podcast is about to become history itself. Don't cry because it's over, smile because it's happened, or whatever they say. It's been a real pleasure producing and hosting this show over the course of the past 18 months. Together, you and I have heard from brewers and business people, advertisers and truck drivers, risk takers and rule breakers, basically everyone who's made American beer into the potent cultural and commercial force that it is today. We won second place podcast from the North American Guild of Beer Writers in our first year and first place podcast in our second year. It was a great ride. As we were thinking about how to wrap the show, it became clear that we should turn the Taplines Time Machine forward instead of backwards and make some predictions for what's to come for the American beer industry. To speculate on how its past might inform its future and lay down an episode with those speculations as a sort of time capsule for younger generations of beer drinkers and thinkers to compare with their reality decades later. It also became clear which guest we ought to book for this swan song, Maureen Ogle. That's the good news. Over not one, not two, but 3 Taplines episodes, the inimitable historian and author of Ambitious Brew has schooled us on everything from the rise of the light beer wars to the fall of those same light beer wars to the catastrophic unraveling of the once mighty Schlitz. Maureen was our very first guest on the show, so it only makes sense that she's our very last guest, too. She's as brilliant as ever. Tune in one more time to hear us ponder together what the U.S. beer business might look like in 25 years. And I should add, have a great fucking time doing it, too. It's Maureen Ogle. It's the future of the American brewing industry. It's the Taplines time capsule, and it's all right here, right now, for the last time on VinePair's Taplines. Maureen Ogle, welcome back to Taplines.
Thank you very much for having me. Again, for the last time.
For the last time, yes, that's right. So, Maureen, I went back and tabulated in the Taplines archives, and this is not 1, not 2, not 3, but your 4th appearance on VinePair's Modern Beer History podcast, the one and only. We're so glad to have you back for a 4th time.
Thank you. Of course, people might think, God, is this the best he can do? I mean, he must be desperate to find people.
Yeah, okay. We're really scraping the bottom of the barrel, and Maureen is what came up.
Okay.
I kid.
We kid. Yes, we do. Yeah.
We're so glad to have you. Our listeners will certainly be glad to have you because, Maureen, your episodes on the rise of the light beer wars, the end of the light beer wars, and the colorful, self-inflicted, cartoonishly inept downfall of the once mighty Schlitz are some of our most popular episodes of all time in 60 or so episodes that we've done here on Taplines. So I think listeners have shown pretty resoundingly, not voting with their dollars, but voting with their downloads, that they're a fan. So this is a real treat.
Thank you.
Yes, it was a nice little ego boost for you. Does that feel good?
When you're my age, honestly, you have no fucks left to give. And so, whatever.
Yeah, cool. Fuck it.
Yeah, thank you.
That's a good attitude, I think, with which we should approach this episode, because this episode, okay, Maureen, we're saying fuck it to the Taplines format as such, and we're going to do something different. You and I are going to boldly go where no Taplines guest and host have gone before. We're going into the great unknown, Maureen. We're going into the foggy future of the American beer industry.
Okay.
Are you ready?
Oh, all right. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, Maureen's
go ahead.
Maureen's like, what is the point of this? I'm a historian.
No.
I look to the past, not the future.
It is the toughest thing. I get asked this a lot, and it is the tough stuff.
Maureen, before we get into the tough stuff, the text, if you will, of this episode, let's do a little backgrounding. I mean, your credentials to most folks who are listening to this podcast are already well known, but for those who haven't, give us the quick and dirty. When did you start as a historian looking at the American beer business?
In 2002, I'm going to say this very quickly. In 2002, I had just finished a book, A History of Key West, Florida, and I had just left academia. I was looking for something to write about. Driving down the street in Des Moines, Iowa. I live north of Des Moines, and about a block and a half ahead of me, well, 2 blocks, 3 blocks, I could see where I was going, which was a family-owned Italian grocery store that was celebrating its 100th anniversary at the time. And as I was driving down the street to go there, about a block and a half in front of me, this red truck pulled up to a stop sign, and he was far enough away from me, so the driver kept going. It was a man, and the truck, it was a big, very clean, bright red truck, and it said Budweiser. And I thought, that's it. I'm going to write a history of beer in America, because why not? I didn't even know if Budweiser was a brand or the name of a company or whatever. That is literally how this life-changing thing started for me.
But you drank beer?
No.
Never?
Oh, when I was an undergraduate in Iowa City at the Vine, dime beers, hell yes.
Yeah.
Oh God, yes.
Yeah.
Yes, I drank a lot of beer when I was young, but I was 50 when I decided to, and no, I didn't. I hadn't had a beer I couldn't even remember the last time I had a beer. And in fact, I wrote the book, and it wasn't until I was done, I thought, maybe I should drink some beer. So I think I started drinking beer maybe before the book was actually published, but very late in the proceedings.
Yeah. And the book, of course, would become, the title would be Ambitious Brew. And it is, for my money, the most both comprehensive and enjoyable histories of the American beer business that's been written for the mass market. Of course, there are probably academic texts out there that may go a little bit deeper than or in specific areas, but if you're looking there's not. Yeah, well,
there wasn't then.
Yeah.
There was nothing.
I've never come across one. But my point is that most people don't even want to read academic books. Snooze.
Oh, of course I don't want to read them. I mean, I do that for a living. But no, when I left academia, my intention was to write history for the rest of us.
There you go.
For ordinary people like me. So that was the audience.
Ambitious Brew is a beer history for the rest of us. I can't recommend it enough, listeners. It's why Maureen and I know each other. I picked up the book. I thought it was fantastic. It's informed a lot of my reporting over the last decade and a half on the American beer business. And it makes Maureen, one thing that makes Maureen such a wonderful guest here on Taplines. The other, of course, is Maureen's dazzling personality, which we could never do without. And Maureen, we're so glad to have you. But now I think it's time to get into the business here, Maureen.
Okay.
It's time.
Right. Let's.
So you have 22 years of awareness for the beer industry. Some of that was more intensive, of course, than others. Although you're working right now and have been for the last year and a half or two on another history of a specific brewery.
That's right.
Of August Shells in Minnesota.
Yes.
So you've been looking at this industry for a long time. In other words,
I have.
And,
it's crazy.
Yeah. And this is important. This is important experience because, what's the line? History never repeats itself, but it often rhymes. Like, there are, of course, things that, I know. You like that hack touch
I've never heard that before.
No, stop it. What?
No, I haven't.
Oh, my God, Maureen. Is that the definition of irony, that a historian has never heard that very famous quote about history?
Well, I've never heard the rhyme part. I've heard usually it's you're doomed to repeat it,
Those who don't learn from history are doomed to repeat it. Another great phrase to sort of frame this episode up. And what happened in the past will not, of course, happen in the future in the American beer business. That much is certain. But that's not to say that there won't be shades of similarity, of parallel between what has happened and what will happen, right? I mean, there are cycles to so many parts of American history, and certainly, consumer packaged goods and beer and brands. Like, some of these things are cyclical, and some of the ways that things have happened in the past will give us some idea for what might happen in the future. Our project today, Maureen, is to think a little bit about how those things might happen. I've got some questions for us. Like I said, the format will be a little bit different than it has been in the past.
Okay.
And listener, I've intentionally kept Maureen in the dark and totally ignorant to these questions. So she'll be coming at these cold. Okay. Maureen, we know you can handle it, and I would only give you what I know you can handle. But I want to look, let's set the Taplines Time Machine. We normally go backwards. Today we're going to go forwards into the future, and we're going to look, let's say hypothetically, about 25 years from now. So the year is roughly 2050, right? Yeah. We're halfway through the 21st century. This is far enough. Right. Yeah, I know, right? I'll be if I'm still alive, I'll be I'm 36. I'll be 61. You'll be what? You mind saying your age? You'll be 61 also.
I'll be 100 and I'm 72, so I can't do math.
No, you'll be 97. You'll be 97.
Okay, all right. Well, then I'll still be here. Okay.
And exactly, you'll be the august age of 97. And the year is 2050, and we're going to talk a little bit about what we think the American beer industry might look like at that time, listener. So this is going to be a thought experiment. None of this is investment advice. None of it is legal advice. That said, if you get rich off of this advice, please cut us in. We'll take the money. But Maureen, in 2050, I want to discuss this from a few different angles. The basic framework here is that the American beverage alcohol business is operated more or less on a 3-tier system. Of course, there are many exceptions to those 3 tiers because they're all at the state level. But let's talk about the tiers first and foremost. We have supplier, we have distributor, and we have retailer. And then, of course, you've got the drinker. What do you see for the future of the 3-tier system? People have been predicting its demise for the last 50 years, 25 years in the future. Do we still have the 3-tier system in place?
The reason I don't think so, and you're right, a lot of people have tried, most notably in the Ninth Circuit, when Costco sued the
state
Costco
of Washington
case,
yes,
at which
famous,
they lost
infamous.
on a technicality rather than the merits of the case. And what I think is that it will go away. And the reason I think that is because internet, right? Now people can order beer online. They can get it delivered to their door. And there's something sort of absurd about the idea that you can't, that there are laws against having beer delivered to your door. So I think, I don't see how the 3-tier system can survive another 25 years in the digital age, when delivery systems and ordering systems are completely different. So on the other hand, never underestimate the stupidity of Americans, because the reason for the 3-tier system, I guess, that's where I'm going to start with this. The reason for the 3-tier system, for those who don't know, is to protect us from the dangers of alcohol. That is the entire reason that it exists, to put as many barriers between beer drinkers and the actual beer, whiskey drinkers and the whiskey, and so on and so forth. So that's the thing that kind of keeps it propped up, is still this deep belief that somehow marijuana and heroin are equivalents, and beer is, going to destroy you if someone just delivers it to your door. On the other hand, we're now in an age when we clearly in this country have no moral values anymore. So that's why I think there's just going to be a confluence of events that is just going to get rid of the 3-tier system. The reason it's never been gotten rid of is because the 4 or 5 biggest beer companies and the immensely powerful and immensely wealthy distributors don't want to get rid of it. And especially the distributors, the McCain family, as in John McCain, he married his wife, Cindy McCain, her family. The reason she's filthy rich, I shouldn't say filthy. The reason she's rich is because
she's
her
filthy
family
rich.
owns, they own a beer distributorship. And so the people who distribute beer, they totally don't want to get rid of it. And they are, between the wholesalers and the and the actual beer makers, there's a huge amount of reason. The big beer makers, not the small ones. They're the interstate beer makers. There's a lot of resistance, but I just don't see how it can survive 25 more years in a digital age. It just seems too clunky.
Well, let me ask you this, Maureen, and that is an excellent, I think, evaluation of the situation as it stands. We are in the digital age, but we've been in the digital age, arguably since, like the rise of e-commerce as we now understand it can be dated back, I would say, almost a decade at this point. You already had same-day fulfillment from major retail platforms like Amazon, which really pioneered the way there. We've been living in this age of, instant gratification, of online ordering, of e-commerce that has normalized in the logistics framework that delivers on those lofty promises of commerce have been in place for, like I said, about 10 years. And yet the progress, such as it is, or the NBWA, the National Beer Wholesalers Association, would not call it progress. They would call it the erosion of the
yes, they would.
the consumers, morality and the integrity of this important system has advanced only slightly in that time. How do you see? I mean, obviously there have been advances towards more digitized, direct to consumer beer purchasing experience, such as it is. But it's been pretty minimal, and part of the reason for that has been because of the very powerful, very well organized, politically organized middle tier, the distributors who express their power on the national level through the National Beer Wholesalers Association. For that future to come to pass in 2050, where we think that the three-tier system, maybe hasn't fully been vaporized, but it is no longer, sort of the only way to do business at scale in the beer industry. For that to happen, the NBWA has to lose power. How does that happen, Maureen?
Well, the thing about the wholesalers is,
yes,
they deliver to Costco, right? That's why Costco sued, because they wanted to get rid of that middleman. They wanted to be able to buy in bulk directly from the brewery, and technically you can't do that. I forgot where I was going to go with this. The thing is, there's still going to have to be big wholesalers, right? Because far and away, 90% of the beer sold in this, well, I don't know how much, but I mean, think about it. All the grocery stores, Kroger, A&P, the regional chains that I buy my groceries at here in Iowa, restaurants, there's still going to have to be wholesalers for those huge buyers. But I think the whole, it's not going to be clear anymore that we really need that three-tier system for that to happen, right? The only reason, the wholesalers are still going to have their clients, even if the laws are changed and people are allowed to order beer from, say, your local liquor store or, Dogfish or whatever. It might be that the three-tier system is tweaked in such a way that those barriers are a lot more permeable.
Yep.
But you're still going to need those big wholesalers. So when I think of the three-tier system, what I think of is it's the barriers between the people who want to drink and the people who make the drinks, right?
Sure.
And the laws could tweak that to eliminate some of those barriers at least, but you're still going to have huge wholesalers. And the only reason they got as big and powerful as they did is because there was simply no other way. But even if you start letting people like me go online and order beer and have it delivered to my door, there's still, the vast majority of beer is still going to have to go through a huge warehouse delivered by a bajillion trucks.
Yeah.
So, it could be that it gets tweaked in a sense that like the state of Iowa no longer has. I don't know. I'm just thinking it can be tweaked in many ways, so it's not as restrictive.
Yeah. Well, and luckily, since this all happens at the state level, we'll watch a 50-state shit show unfold as each state sort of hems and haws and slowly shambles towards a more permeable 3-tier system over the course of the next 25 years.
I think what will happen is, I think probably someone is going to file a suit saying that somehow their freedom is being infringed because they're not allowed to go online and buy alcohol, and it will work its way through a court, or maybe a small brewery. Small breweries wouldn't have the money.
Yeah, but that's not exactly. It can't be a small brewery. It has to be like some fucking like retailer, or excuse me, retail customer, like Joe Schmo that secretly has the dark money funding of like the Federalist Society or fucking the Cato Institute, and they push it all the way to the Supreme Court, and then Sammy Alito and co. decide that purchasing beer is actually a form of speech. And so
oh my God.
And so therefore you have to be allowed to buy beer online. I mean, have we thought about a First Amendment attack here, Maureen? I think, I'm not a lawyer, you're not a lawyer, so fuck it, let's do it,
God, that's the thing with.
Well, you said yourself, never underestimate the stupidity of the system.
No. And when, it is hard for me right now, I'll just say, to think ahead 25 years because, I'm not convinced that planet Earth is still going to have many human beings left on it.
Oh, yeah, I should have stipulated.
Blown to smithereens.
I should have stipulated that this assumes no nuclear winter.
Right.
Yeah.
And I have no idea if the United States is still going to be a republic. Yeah. So God only knows.
Okay.
I don't know.
Well, let's lay down those stipulations now, and those apply retroactively. So we just discussed the 3-tier system as it might stand 25 years from now, and Maureen's prediction, which I think I'm pretty persuaded by. I do think, to share my prediction to the extent that it's valuable for listeners. I'm not a historian, but I've been covering this for a decade and a half now. I do think that that's more or less where I sort of think that this will go. Right now, the United States Postal Service is not allowed to handle alcohol. Congress has introduced, lawmakers in Congress have introduced bills pretty much every session trying to get this overturned. The NBWA and its fellow travelers have opposed that pretty rigorously on the grounds that this is, beer distributors have some specialized knowledge and logistical prowess to preserve the sanctity of getting beer only into the hands of legal drinking age customers, and the USPS couldn't ever be trained to do this, right? This is, in my mind, a very facile and just not plausible argument, and I think the dam won't hold. Eventually, that will burst. The USPS will begin to be able to carry alcohol. UPS and other private carriers already are, so like that's another sort of chink in that armor, right? Like that won't continue. That dam will eventually break. You will start to see more franchise reform to the point where small brewers, I believe, across 50 states to varying degrees, because again, this all happens at the state level for the most part, but you will start to see small brewers have more mobility between distributors than they even currently have, and the mobility that they currently have is dramatically more than they had 25 years prior to this. So
where they had none.
Yeah, right.
Right.
Exactly. So I do think you're right. I think like we will wind up with some sort of appendage of a 3-tier system that, as it currently stands right now, but it'll be much more permeable, and 2 generations of drinkers from now who will just be, coming of age in 2050, they will be much more familiar with the idea of ordering beer directly to their door, just as a matter of course, and it won't necessarily go through.
That's right. I think that's right. That's right. It's one thing to say, we've been in the digital age since approximately 1996, when the Today Show had that famous episode, and Katie Couric said, "I think there's this thing called the internet. I'm not sure what it, I mean, we've come a ways,
right.
But there are a lot of ways in which we still are not, there's still just there are places where it just hasn't taken hold yet, and I think this is one of them.
But I do think your point is well made and well taken, which is that like this is also not necessarily what the consumer wants at scale, right? Like I do want to be able to buy a case of beer online and have it delivered to my door, but there's always going to be a premium charged for that service, right? I'm always going to have to pay for shipping, or someone's going to have to pay for shipping somewhere along the value chain. And I have a car, and I go to the grocery store anyway. So, like, if I need a bunch of beer, I'm not going to order it via an app. I'm going to order it via the groceries, or I'm going to buy it via the grocery store. And the economy of scale that the large retailers and the large distributors that service those retailers can deliver in the form of savings to people who shop at the grocery store will always be a competitive advantage for beer. Beer is fucking heavy in a way that a lot of stuff that you buy on Amazon is not. Beer is also a food product in a way that a lot of stuff you buy on Amazon is not. There are limits to, even if ideologically you have disdain for the 3-tier system, or tactically or operationally you find it frustrating if you're a small brewer or a small retailer, the reality is you can only get consumed. I suspect you can only, even in 2050, the behavior will only change so much to the point where consumers will, at some point, maybe even not necessarily want to order stuff online more than they already do. I think they will want to order more online. Yeah. I don't think it'll be all of the beer. NBWA, so you can sleep not easy. I'm sure this upsets you. If anyone's listening to the NBWA, I'm sure they're upset with this line of conversation. But yeah, I don't think it's fully going away.
And the other thing about the big the big wholesalers is they've never operated in a competitive market, right? Since 1933, in effect, they've been very protected. Within, there have been people who've bought other distributors out, but in some sense, they've been getting subsidized by the 3-tier legislation. Yeah. And someone could say, you know what, if you really want to distribute beer, man, get out there and do it in a really free market. We're just going to cut these restrictions out of this.
There's an old joke about libertarians, which are, the idea is that they're basically, if you had to describe a libertarian as a type of animal, you describe them as a house cat, convinced that they are, like masters of their own domain, but also not exposed to any of the elements or the food chain or anything like that.
Yes.
I think so. This is somewhat applicable to a lot of operators in the middle tier. Not all of them. I do think that there are distributors that add genuine value. And to your point, I think a lot of large suppliers would continue relationships with their large wholesalers because there are competitive advantages there. However, the blanket assertion of the National Beer Wholesalers Association, I'm paraphrasing here, but whenever I interact with the NBWA, the assertion is that these are vital competitive entities across the board, and I just simply don't think that's true based on lived experience.
Yeah, they, as I say, they have competition.
Yeah,
they have competition, but
there's a privilege in being able to pick your competition.
Exactly. That's my point. I mean, they are like cats in that. I mean, they have since 1933, wholesalers have never had to compete in a genuinely open, competitive market.
Yeah. Yeah.
Within the industry, sure, there are big guys that come along and run little guys out of business and so on and so forth. But remember, this started in 1933, and these were family-owned businesses. And once families figured out that, and then they became basically corporations. They're going to be fine.
Yeah, they'll be fine.
They'll be fine.
Weep not for the wholesale tier. They'll make it, listeners. But we have a lot to cover, and we got to move on, Maureen.
Okay.
Focus instead. Move from the middle tier, and let's talk a little bit about the watchword on the beer industry's lips. Trade groups, experts, insiders have been talking about it intensely over the course of the past 18 months, and to some extent the past 4 or 5 years. I'm talking, of course, about neo-prohibition. This is the buzzword, right? Neo-prohibition. It's on the rise, Maureen. The war on alcohol is on the rise. Maureen, you're groaning. I think you see where this is headed. However, this is an exercise about looking to the future, so we must address it. The trade contends, and I'm sort of painting with a broad brush here, but the contention of the industry, and this is true of wine and spirits as well, but this is a podcast about the beer industry. The contention is that there are dark forces aligning against the trade of beer, right? The idea of drinking, right, is becoming less popular, not because individual consumers are making choices about their tastes and about their interests or whatever, but because, in part, global public health officials are advancing a regime of anti-alcohol. Now, I'm phrasing this somewhat colorfully, but this is really the contention. This is the argument, right? Is that the World Health Organization, the WHO, and its counterpart organizations at the national level in especially Western Europe and North America are starting to sort of array a broadside assault or a head-on assault on the beer industry and its ongoing operation. Maureen, you've written about the prohibition, not neo-prohibition, but the original, the prohibition. And you have excellent perspective in that regard because you're also living through this moment of sort of industry panic about neo-prohibition. The situation then, the situation now, are there any parallels? Is there any similarity between what was happening in the 20s and what is 1919 or whatever, and what is happening now?
Okay, first of all, I have to say, because I've been working on a different book that's not about beer, I'm not totally tuned in at the moment, and so
this is big panic.
But this is the WHO that is leading this.
The WHO came out in 2022, I want to say, very recently, with a statement that there's no safe level of alcohol consumption, right? And so this obviously really sent the industry into a tizzy about globally, not just in the United States, not just the beer industry. But there were also, the beer industry here is also tracking downward, slightly lower volumes of beer being sold, lower volumes of alcohol in general being sold. So you can see why that statement from the WHO and other public health officials taking a harder line on alcohol, plus the market trend, have sort of conspired and sort of coagulated into an industry narrative that they're under attack. So yes, that is happening.
They're not under attack. they're just not. Listen, okay, first of all, the WHO has no authority, but it's got to do something.
They don't have an army.
They have to justify their existence, right? I mean, they have to justify their existence, and they've got to have a stand, and they sure aren't going to come out and say, God, everybody, you should just drink beer all day long. It would be great.
Right.
So they've probably got somebody on staff who said, well, why don't we do something about this? I mean, I will point out that the WHO has been saying for 25 years, at least, maybe 30, that we should all stop eating beef. And the amount of beef being consumed keeps rising.
Yeah.
So I'm just saying, plus, there were prohibitionists in the 1940s and 50s. In the late 1970s, there was a very powerful neo-prohibition movement. That's what they called themselves. They're the people who came up with MAD, Mothers Against Drunk Driving, and which then turned into whatever the other one is, something about drugs. Anyway, like football stadiums were pressured to no longer sell beer.
Yeah.
It was heavy duty in the late 80s, but it fizzled out pretty quickly because, come on.
Well, and part of the reason it fizzled out is because the industry acquiesced in a way that allowed them to sort of shape the response that MAD was calling for. I mean, MAD was a very well-organized political bloc, but it had nowhere near the resources or the sophistication at a lobbying level of the beer industry. And the beer industry and the alcohol industry in general got wise and were like, well, we may as well sort of co-opt, or a less nefarious word would be like partner with MAD to come up with responsibility campaigns and anti-drunk driving messaging. And we'll do that we'll do that self-regulation so we don't bring down the federal hammer on ourselves, and we spin that away from us. And that has been a very successful project for the beer industry and the beverage alcohol industry in general, is this idea of industry self-regulation, right? This idea that we don't need to ban this stuff. Bans don't work, yada, yada, yada. Don't raise our taxes because look at all this money we're putting into PSAs. Look at all this partnership we've done with MAD, So yes, I mean that, and that's what happened in the past. In the future, Maureen, do you you've reported on and done the history research on the context for the first prohibition, the prohibition. That was, first of all, like a half-century long project to come to fruition? Like, that did not happen overnight, first of all.
Oh, God, no.
Yeah.
No.
And second of all, like, the conditions that existed that allowed that to happen, are they present now? Could they be present? Yeah.
No. Okay, here's why prohibition happened. Imagine we all get in a car and we go through a time tunnel, a time warp, and we come out and say 1850, and we walk down the streets of, I don't know, pick a city.
Ames, Iowa.
Well, I'm not sure Ames, Iowa. Ames, Iowa didn't exist then. So let's just say
Kansas City, Missouri. Yeah. Missouri.
Well, yes, actually, that's a good example. There weren't any alcohol laws to speak of, except very, very locally. And if you were walking down the street, you would see public intoxication constantly. It was everywhere. It's very hard to get people to understand just how sober city streets are these days.
Yeah.
And it got worse as the century went on, because cities no one was expecting big cities, right? I mean, they're relatively new in human history, and how do you manage them? What do you do with them?
Yeah.
And at the time, because public drunkenness was so universal, it was just ubiquitous. There was just no way to get around it. That's what really propelled the prohibition movement from the 1870s on. The bigger cities got, the more, I mean, it was a problem.
Yeah.
You wouldn't enjoy it. I wouldn't enjoy it.
I like to piss and shit myself in the street, Maureen, just like the next guy.
Then more power to you, baby cakes. Yeah.
Right. So this was a blight.
So the situation, we don't have anything even remotely resembling that now. And in the late 1970s and early 80s, the big motivator for that was a very wealthy family in Marin County, California, who had a bug up their ass about alcohol. And they just dumped a shitload of money into it. Sorry for my language, everybody.
Of course.
They just poured a bunch of money in it and managed to get some traction. And as you say, the alcohol makers did respond in various ways. But the WHO is a big nothing burger, generally speaking. They can't get people to stop eating meat, and they're not going to get people to stop drinking beer. And if the issue came up that suddenly you're going to have people who are going to say, well, we think drunkenness is so awful that we're going to start making bars close at 6 p.m. in the evening, and they can't open until 10, and nobody can drink on Sunday. Man, Americans today aren't going to put up with that. The whole reason this country's in a shit fit right now is because everybody wants their fucking rights. Everyone, and no one's going to let their right to drink be taken away from them. That is just not going to happen. I don't know why in the world these people are panicked about it. They shouldn't be. They should just ignore it. Neo-prohibition, it just comes along periodically, and we hadn't had an outbreak for, God, 25, 35, 45 years. So, it was totally time. Americans we have infantilized alcohol. We are deeply uncomfortable with it. And there are always going to be people who believe that if you sit down and have a drink of beer, you are going to just end up hammered. And somehow those people always manage to get, a little bit of space at the table and make their demands. No.
I think a key point is that right now, and I don't, for the foreseeable future between now and 2050, the space that they have at the table let's say they're anti-alcohol advocates. The neo-prohibitionist tag is obviously inflammatory, and it serves industry's purpose of contextualizing this as an attack upon industry, which I'm not persuaded by. But there are anti-alcohol advocates, certainly. Their space at the table is pretty fucking slim, man. They can fit like an elbow on the table, maybe. They don't have a full plate. And I'm talking, this analogy is referring to their funding and their theory of change and their levers of power that they can pull to create that change. These are very, very minimal. They don't have a lot of money. The WHO's entire budget, I don't know it off the top of my head. I did some research on this not too long ago. It is dwarfed by the annual profits of even just one macro brewer.
Exactly.
Right? The fucking FDA and USDA sets the dietary guidelines. They have dramatically smaller budgets, right, to do this stuff. Like if there's a Joe Schmo public health official at fucking like the University of Halifax or wherever, who's like publishing research about how at 3 drinks a week, health outcomes get 15% worse in certain populations. That dude exists at the fucking pleasure of whoever is funding his chair at that, like we are talking about, and there are problems with that, right? That's bad probably in the grand scheme of things that, private industry has dramatically more resources to project its narrative upon the world than subject matter experts do, right? Maybe that's not great in the grand scheme of things, but it is very much the reality. I don't see that changing in the next 25 years. It's not the way anything is going. If you look at the way funding for public universities in this country, where a lot of this research is generated, that is getting slashed more or less to the bone, pretty much all over the place. We're
not going to have a CDC anymore.
Yeah.
When the next pandemic comes, which will probably be in the next 5 years, no.
Yeah,
as I say. So let me ask you a question.
No, that's not how this works. I'm just kidding. No, I can't.
Why are beer makers so freaked out about this? I don't get why they would be freaked out about it, because it's truly nothing to fret about.
It's a good question. So I think there is the basic fear of change, right? Like the future is uncertain, and it would be great if we could just continue to operate the way we have been operating. But we need to see around the bend. So that's kind of the hand-wringing that goes on in business in general. And I think it just happens to be, it happens to have alighted on this idea of neo-prohibitionism, because that's, like I said, it's a buzzword in the industry. It's a watchword in the industry. It is true, by the way. I should say that the WHO and other public health officials have not just found this subject as like their new hobby horse for no reason, which is another contention of some industry fellow travelers. Like they're picking on us because they already ran big tobacco out of business, and now they're picking on us, which is factually untrue, right? Like big tobacco is thriving. It's not. It doesn't occupy the same place in the American marketplace that it once did. But like you can still fucking buy cigarettes, and like their profits are still fine. The project of running big tobacco out of business, I think, in the final analysis, or at least the 25 years removed analysis from the master settlement agreement, is that it didn't really fucking work. So, first of all, I think that is not an accurate comparison, but I think there's a victim mentality that is very compelling to someone within the industry, right? Hey, we're doing all this stuff to promote individual responsibility. Hey, we do all these PSAs. Hey, like we say, you shouldn't have more than a few drinks, per night, blah, blah, blah. And they're still coming after us. Can you believe this shit, right? This bunker mentality is very powerful from within. You understand why they might circle the wagons. I mean, it's incumbent on them, because they do business in this marketplace, not to do that and to try to remain in touch with their consumers, in touch with the regulatory landscape and yada, yada, yada. But you can see why that would be an appealing posture to crouch into.
I can see it, but I think it's kind of a dumb waste of time.
Me too.
Not least because, I'm going to just toss this into the mix, not least because of marijuana, which you may be asking about eventually, because I gather, suddenly THC laced drinks are kind of a big deal. But it would be totally bizarre to finally get to the point where we're going to have legal marijuana. And at the same time, somebody says, "Hey, kids, let's get rid of booze." Come on. This is not realistic thinking. It's just not.
So you have a very prescient comment, because this is where we're going to go next, is to the question of cannabis, Maureen.
Yes.
Right now, as we record this in late 2024, we have upcoming change in both the presidential administration and the control of the Senate. The House is already controlled by Republicans. Now the Senate will be controlled by Republicans. And of course, the White House is being returned to a Republican, Donald Trump's second term. Both candidates in this year's presidential election, Kamala Harris and Donald Trump, have made gestures at the idea of federal legalization of marijuana. I mean, I think this is something that the first quarter of the 21st century has been very much a will they, won't they conversation. It is finally reached the point where people kind of, I think the mainstream opinion turned on the war on drugs, and the idea is that, okay, this didn't work, and marijuana is not reasonably classified in the same category as some of the harder drugs, and yet at the federal level, it remains prohibited. People have been waiting over the course of the past 25 years for federal legalization, and companies have risen and fallen betting on legalization arriving, and as of yet, it still hasn't. 25 years from now, looking at the vice landscape, not just beer, but the broader vice landscape, do you see federal legalization for cannabis being a part of it? And if so, what does that do to the American beer industry?
Well, those are two. Okay, I think there's a great deal of money to be made from drugs. I have been in favor of legalizing drugs for 50 years.
Across the board, all drugs.
And the reason I have been is because, do you know how many billions of dollars get spent in this country every day that is not taxed?
Yeah.
Come on.
Sure.
That's nuts. I just think we should legalize drugs. All of them. All of them. Do I think that's... I do think that because of the money factor, that's going to be the tipping point. The people who are coming into power are unbelievably gifted grifters, and they will grift on anything. And I mean, crypto is clearly going to be their next big grift. But marijuana, I do not see this administration doing anything but legalizing it, because there are so many people involved in MAGA world who could make shitloads of money from marijuana.
Yeah.
So I think that's going to be the tipping point. I mean, thank God for Colorado that they did what they did and legalized it, and these other states have, hopped on.
Yeah, 26 states or so that have some form of recreational legalization at this point.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
In 2024, but... Yeah.
Right. So I think pot is going to be legal sooner than we think.
Yeah.
Of course, I should say I'm constantly amazed that it's not legal, because there is so much money. Like in Iowa, which is the Florida of the North in the MAGA world. I'm kind of amazed that they haven't figured out yet how much money they could all be making personally if they legalized, marijuana here, and they could quickly buy the companies that, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
I mean, there's lots of money to be had. So I'm a little surprised it's still illegal.
But you expect by 2050 that federal legalization for cannabis will have come down.
Oh, God, yes. I would be astounded if it's not legal by 2030.
Yeah.
Now, yeah. Now, cannabis and beer.
How do they interact? I mean, I know how they interact within my own body, but how do they interact in the marketplace?
Well, I just noticed it now. The Iowa legislature made a mistake in a piece of legislation last year and accidentally made it impossible to even sell Delta 9
THC
and Delta 10
Yeah.
THC. So the brewers here in Iowa who were already adding it, all of a sudden they had all this stock and they'd printed these labels, and all of a sudden they can't sell the stuff anymore. So if people are already adding THC to beer in Iowa, even though we can't sell it here now because of this mistake made in the legislation. Geez, I mean, and if you're a beer maker, you're already fighting a losing battle against every other kind of booze, and you're losing a battle against all those crappy seltzer waters with, I mean, why anybody wants to make beer right now is totally not clear to me because, there is so much competition. But I think someday Anheuser-Busch is going to put out a THC drink. Kids.
One assumes, right? Like this is the sort of thing that Anheuser-Busch InBev and Anheuser-Busch before it has done since time immemorial, which is ignore a segment, hope it goes away, assume it's a fad. Mm-hmm. When it sticks around, they'll try to clone it and do whatever they can to build something in-house. When that inevitably fails, because they're incapable of doing that, they'll just start buying the brands that are successful, and history will repeat itself. But since we mentioned Anheuser-Busch InBev, this is a question that I had on my list here, which is, does Anheuser-Busch InBev as a global conglomerate still exist in 2050, 25 years from now? It's been less than a quarter century that it has existed. InBev hostily took over Anheuser-Busch in 2008. Under the control of the Brazilians from Ambev, a lot of confusing precursor corporations.
Yes.
Anheuser-Busch InBev is formed in 2008, so it's been around for 16 years, not quite 2 decades. But in that time, it has certainly sort of forged a legacy for itself as a global portfolio of beer and beverage brands. But it is massive, and it is not really able to grow in the same way that it has in this market, in the United States market anymore, because it has acquired so many properties or assets or whatever you want to call them that the DOJ has said you kind of got to stop. You got to stop doing that. That's the end of that, which is part of the reason they no longer acquire craft beer brands. Does ABI exist in the same way that it currently exists? Do big conglomerates like that still have what it takes to operate in the beer business at that point?
Sure.
Yeah. You don't see that going away.
No. Remember, I don't remember the year, but about 2 years after InBev, after InBev bought AB, so it was ABI, Anheuser-Busch InBev, about two years later or 3, they bought SAB Miller, which was a gigantic global corporation.
Yes.
Yes, it will, but it might, in 2050, there will certainly be gigantic conglomerates, but might be a Chinese one.
Yeah, right. There's no reason that ABI would remain under Brazilian.
No.
Yeah, sure.
In the 1990s, August Bush III made forays into the Chinese retail market, and his board said, "Oh my God, you're out of your mind. We're not going to do that. Just stop. You're ridiculous." And of course, that was a huge mistake. They could have gotten in on the bottom, but oh God, no. It might not be AB, InBev, SAB, or whatever the heck this, the big company's called, but yes, there will be, yes.
What about its perennial number 2, Molson Coors? What does the corporate side of the beer market in the United States look like another 25 years from now? I mean, Constellation is charging hard from the number 3 spot volume-wise. Heineken is 4, I think, and Pabst is 5, somewhere along their way. And then Molson Coors, of course, is number 2. They have consolidated to the point where, there's not a whole lot more consolidation that can happen at the upper edge of the marketplace. Does this become a 2-horse race at some point, or a 3-horse race in Constellation? I mean,
or maybe even a 1-horse race once the Chinese get into it. But it depends. Well, it depends on what I don't know if we'll have a Department of Justice anymore. I don't know if we'll have antitrust laws.
What a fun conversation to be having. Talk about existential dread to be talking about.
But what I mean, antitrust laws. Will we still have antitrust laws, which are useless? The Sherman Antitrust Act is a completely useless legal device. It's just a terrible law.
Yeah, close
it's
to
never
a dead
done
letter.
much of anything.
Yeah.
It's not a. So yes, we're not going to lose these big corporations. Who else is going to deliver bazillion bottles of beer to bars and grocery stores and restaurants and Costco and I
Well,
don't see that. I don't see
but
them going
you're a
away.
historian, Maureen. Like there was a time in this country where there was a political will and a political appetite to break up Ma Bell. Like it's not unheard of in the history, even in the semi-recent history of American
That's right.
commerce, that like these things change, right? There can be new tides of anti-corporate, anti-conglomerate sentiment that arise, and like if the political winds blow the right way at the right time, we're talking about a 25-year horizon. Is that enough time to blow out with the sort of crony capitalism that we're seeing from the incoming Trump administration and in with a more crusading, reform-oriented antitrust regime? It's not, to me, unfathomable, but you have a much broader horizon in mind for this stuff.
And I'll admit, in my old age, I've become a lot more cynical than I used to be. I don't know. One thing, just specifically, technically speaking, ABI SAB Miller is not a U.S. company,
No,
right?
yeah.
So they can do whatever they want to do.
But one of their most important markets is the United States, and their operation within the U.S. market has to be addressed through, at least in theory, through the DOJ
but
or whatever.
it's not even clear to me how important the North American market is to them, because it's a mature market and they want to get in on, markets like, I don't know, in
Southeast Asia,
Laos or,
sure.
You know what I mean?
Yeah, there's fun markets where they have a freer hand and there's less regulatory restrictions and people are still drinking higher volumes per capita. Yeah, the good stuff.
And they're also maybe still drinking local beers. China used to have, when I first visited there in the late 80s, there was no national Chinese beer. When we went back 13 years later, all those local beers were gone.
And what was it, Snow?
Heineken, which was the first North American beer that got into China.
Heineken, not a Western beer, you mean? Heineken's Dutch.
Yes, a Western beer, yes. And Snow was just starting, if I remember right, just kind of starting to show up. But anyway, yes, if we had a more equitable society where people cared about stuff,
each other, anything, the environment.
I mean, we could do all kinds of things.
Put a man on the moon.
Let's send Elon first, and maybe the ship will get lost.
That's a good point. I have a couple men I'd like to put on the moon. Yeah.
Oh man. Except, how about Mars? Isn't Mars further
far
away?
enough away? Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, I need it to be someplace very far away. Anyway, I guess I don't know. I'm in a perfect world, but God, we're never going to have a perfect world. And, the United States hasn't changed that much since the 1940s. Sure, we have internet now and we have lots more immigrants, and we're sliding right into an authoritarian theocracy is what we're sliding into. That's a little. Now, if we can become a theocracy that many people would like us to be, then booze is going to go away. Everyone needs to understand that part.
Yeah, and that's a big tension in the right-wing project in this country, is between free market ideologues who are humping Milton Friedman texts up and down the court and evangelical ideologues and Baptists and et cetera, who view alcohol and pornography and other forms of vice as elements of social decay that must be eradicated. And that war, if there's a war on alcohol, that's where it's going to come from.
That's right. That's right. That's why.
And those people are a lot closer to levers of power than the fucking WHO.
Yes, exactly. So that's why you're totally right that MAGA really does have this
Contains
give us
multitudes.
everything. Just give us everything. The rest of you can go starve.
Yeah.
I mean, it could be that, they'll let us keep booze as a form of bread and circus.
Yeah, right. Social control. Yeah.
Yeah. I guess it's just hard for me to imagine a world that is not where economies are not so much dominated by big corporations as that big corporations exist, right? I
and have a social license to operate, right?
Yes, yeah.
But stranger things have happened.
Yes,
and we
God
shall
I'll
see.
say.
Maureen, last questions for you, because we've gone the distance here on Taplines, and at some point this episode and this show must come to an end. I want to end it on a much more. Yeah, I know. Weep not for me. The bell tolls, and I must go. But before I do, I want to end it on a note of sort of we've discussed a lot of sort of political, industrial, sort of thematic questions about the way the beer business works. I want to talk a little bit about the way, sort of you and I in 2024 and over the course of our drinking careers, such as they are, our historian career and our drinking career and our journalism career, all tied up into one big thing. The way we've experienced beer sort of as consumers, the question here is a little bit of a softer and more speculative one, and it is really quite subjective, which is, what would you like listeners in 2050, if anyone can still access this episode in 2050, what would you like them to know about drinking beer in this era, through sort of the second craft beer boom, and now sort of the bust that we're going through in craft beer, or the plateauing that we're going through in craft beer, and these corporations that we're talking about, Anheuser-Busch, Molson Coors, Constellation, have consolidated tremendously, and the middle tier has so much power, but maybe it won't forever. What has that been like for you as a drinker to drink through, and what do you think people should know about having drank beer in this era?
Let's face it, this is the best era to be drinking beer ever in the history of the United States, right? There's more beer of good quality. There's more creative beers. You got way more to choose from than just yellow lager. I mean, this is a great time to drink beer. Also, this is a thing that I get kind of obsessed about. Yes, it's easy to focus on Anheuser-Busch and Molson Coors and so on and so forth. But in fact, a lot of families, thousands of them, have been able to build small businesses based on alcohol. And it's just too easy to assume. I know, I think craft's got 12% of them? Or not, it's not craft, you know what I mean? Independent beer, they got 12%.
I think topped out at 12, 11, 12, whatever.
Something like that. But a lot of people, a lot of families are raising their kids and paying their mortgages by owning a small brewery. And so even in the midst of these gigantic entities and their immense power and the clunky wheels of the three-tier system and so on and so forth, a lot of people still found a way to go off and do this and just earn a living. Not everybody. This is the thing that kills me about business. Why do people assume that if someone starts a business, what they want to do is become the biggest fucking thing in the world, right? I mean, clearly Adolphus Busch did want to be big, but look at the Cholurzos in Russian River, in Northern California, Russian River Brewing. All they wanted was a place where they could ride bicycles to their work, and they just wanted to make beer because they enjoyed doing it. They never wanted to be anything big. Look at the people I'm writing a book about. The Marty family, the Shell Marty family in New Ulm, Minnesota. Not everybody wants to be, King Kong. A lot of people just want to make beer and serve it to people who will enjoy it. And there's nothing wrong with that. And I don't think they get enough credit for it. It's too easy to look at the beer industry as just these behemoths, and you forget that underneath it are a whole bunch of other people who are merrily going on their way and getting no attention whatsoever because they're small.
Not no attention. Stop it.
Well, okay, not no attention, but when people think about the beer industry, what they think of is Anheuser-Busch, right? And Miller. They don't stop and think that there are thousands of families making a nice living, making beer.
Not me.
It is.
Not me, listener. Every time I sit down to write, I think one by one through the 10,000 breweries in the country. And only once I get from the one making 20 barrels to the one making 20 million barrels do I start writing.
Okay.
This is my process.
The reason I decided to write the Shell book was because I thought, how did they manage to, why are they still in business 163 years later? You know, how in the heck do you, in a rural area, in a tiny town, how do you do that? You know, that's very interesting to me. But that's, in some sense, that's not an industrial issue. That's just a small business owner trying to making a product that's difficult to make and sell because of all the regulation. I don't know. I'm kind of fascinated by that.
I am as well, and I'm sure listeners will be looking forward to the book when it comes out. But I think that's a good note to close on, Maureen, which is that like a business like August Shell's, a business like FX Matt or any of the oldest
Russian River.
Well, Russian River's not nearly as old. I'm talking about the old.
Okay,
breweries.
the old.
There are not that many of them left, and and yet some of them persist to their great credit. You've gone very deep on examining what has allowed Shells to endure through so many different cycles. I mean, forget fucking 25 years in the future. Like they've made it 160 years.
Right.
What are there elements of a brewery that make it durable enough to persist in that way?
Yeah, you got to have a family this is their living.
Yeah.
Right. This is they. That's what I think. That's what I was trying to say. It is possible to open a business and not want to become the biggest maker of whatever the thing is you're making in the universe, right? Some people just want to have a business, and this family and it is astounding because, man, it is hard to make a living making beer because of all the regulations, if nothing else. And they went through Prohibition, they managed to hold themselves together. They came back in 1933. They survived the post-war period, which was arguably one of the worst periods for beer makers, the 1950s. So I don't know. I don't know where I'm going with this.
Well, I think maybe another way of saying that is that the organizing principle that has dominated the first quarter century of the 21st century in the beer business has been the corporation. But the organizing principle that has endured before and will likely endure after for producing beer in this country is the family business, which is a totally different
That's right.
institution.
They're not the same things. And there's no shame in wanting to have a family-owned business, I don't know. I was going to say something else about that, but it ran away. Anyway. Yeah.
As thoughts sometimes do.
Yes, mine do a lot.
Maureen.
So one thing I don't like about being old, man, your brain really does start to do some strange things.
Well, your brain has done a lot of strange things on this podcast, but most of those, if not all of them, have been just a sheer delight. Maureen, on behalf of all our Taplines listeners out there, and of course, on behalf of VinePair and from me personally, thank you so much for joining us, not just today, but on the previous 3 episodes, sharing so much of your hard-won perspective and wisdom on the evolution of the American beer industry. It's been such a pleasure to learn from you, not just on this podcast, but on all that. I mean, we've been talking for over a decade at this point. I know.
When we talk on the phone, boy, I have really fed off of your intellectual energy the whole time I've known you. Every time I talk to you, I think, okay, I hadn't thought about that. No, you're a good thought partner for me.
Well, I feel likewise, Maureen, and I think our listeners surely would as well. We'll sign off from the Taplines virtual studio for the last time with Maureen Ogle. Thank you so much for going the distance. We won't see you next time, but we'll see you around. Thanks so much for joining us.
And sometime, Dave, we're going to actually meet in 3 dimensions and have a beer together. We've never met. Yeah. I mean, in real life.
I look forward to it, my friend. But until then, be well.
Thank you very much.
All right.
Thanks, Dave. All right. Cheers.
Taplines is recorded in Richmond, Virginia, and produced by yours truly and Darby Seaside, who, along with the talented Shane Farrick, composed our delightful soundtrack. Just listen to it. I also want to give a quick shout out to the entire VinePair team, and especially co-founders Adam Teeter and Josh Mallon, editor-in-chief Joanna Sciarrino, managing editor Tim McCurdy, and art director Danielle Grinberg, who designed our lovely Taplines logo. And of course, a big thank you to you, yes you listener, for spending time with us week in and week out. We literally couldn't do this without you. I'm Dave Infante, and I'll catch you next time.